The whip cracked across my back for the third time, and I bit down so hard on my lip that I tasted copper. My alpha mate, Bjorn, stood behind me in our ceremonial chamber, his rage radiating through the bond that was supposed to unite us in love. Tonight was meant to be sacred. Instead, it had become my nightmare. All because I said one word. Well, before we continue, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story takes twists you won't believe, and I don't want you to miss what happens next. And tell me the city you're watching from so that I can send you a hug. Now let me tell you how I ended up here and how everything I thought I knew about pack law, destiny, and love was about to shatter. My name is Astrid, and 3 months ago I was chosen by the Alpha of the Silvercrest pack. Chosen. That's what everyone called it. Like I'd won some divine lottery. Bjorn Eriksson was everything an alpha should be, they said. Strong, decisive, descended from the ancient bloodlines that traced back to the first wolf clans of Scandinavia. His father was Gunnar, his grandfather was Ragnar, names that carried weight in our world. When he marked me as his mate during the harvest moon ceremony, the entire pack celebrated for 3 days straight. I should have been celebrating too. But there was something in his eyes that night, something cold beneath the passion, that made my wolf whimper inside me. My own lineage wasn't as impressive. I was the daughter of Freyja, a mid-ranking pack member, and my father Torsten had died defending our territory when I was barely old enough to shift. We weren't nobility. We were survivors. And maybe that's why I saw what others didn't want to see. The bonding night is sacred in our culture. It's when the mate bond fully forms, when two souls intertwine so completely that they can feel each other's emotions, hear each other's thoughts. Supposed to be consensual. Both parties must willingly accept the bond, or it remains incomplete, leaving both wolves weakened and vulnerable. That's pack law. That's what the elders like Sigrid and Halvard had taught us since we were pups. But Bjorn didn't care about my consent. He cared about power. Let me back up. The warning signs were there from the beginning, I just didn't want to see them. 2 weeks after he marked me, I watched him discipline a young pack member named Eric who had accidentally crossed into his path during a run. The punishment was brutal. 20 lashes in front of the entire pack for a crime that should have warranted nothing more than a stern word. Eric's mother Ingrid had to be held back by 3 pack members as her son's blood stained the ceremonial stones. When I questioned Bjorn about it later that night, his hand shot out so fast I didn't see it coming. He grabbed my throat, not hard enough to bruise where others could see, but firm enough to remind me that he could. An alpha's decisions are not to be questioned, he said, his voice soft and dangerous. Not by anyone. Not even by you, little Astrid. My wolf snarled inside me, wanting to fight back, but I was raised to respect the hierarchy, to trust that alphas knew best. So I swallowed my objections and told myself it would get better once we were fully bonded. I was so naive. The weeks leading up to the bonding night were filled with preparations. The pack's seamstress, Hildur, created my ceremonial gown, white silk embroidered with silver wolves. The pack's cook, Magnus, prepared feast after feast. Everyone was excited. My mother cried tears of joy, telling me how proud my father would have been to see his daughter become Luna, the alpha's mate, the second most powerful wolf in the pack. But at night when I was alone, I would stand at my window and look out at the forest, wondering if I could just run. Just shift and disappear into the trees and never come back. My wolf would press against my consciousness, restless and uncertain. She wanted her mate, but she also sensed danger. The instincts of our kind are rarely wrong. 3 days before the bonding ceremony, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I was passing by Bjorn's study when I caught the voices of him and his beta Leaf. They were discussing pack politics, alliances with other territories. Nothing unusual, until Leaf said something that made my blood run cold. Once the bond is complete, she won't be able to refuse you anything. The Alpha Command will work on her just like it does on everyone else. You'll have total control. And Bjorn laughed. Actually laughed. That's the point, brother. Astrid has too much of her father in her. Too much spine. The bond will fix that. She'll be properly obedient, as a Luna should be. I stood frozen in that hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. The bond would give him power over me. Not the partnership I'd imagined, but dominion. Complete control over my will, my choices, my very thoughts. In that moment, I understood that Bjorn hadn't chosen me because he loved me or even wanted me. He'd chosen me because I was strong enough to produce powerful heirs, but not powerful enough to challenge him. I was cattle to him, useful but ultimately disposable. That night I went to the pack's elder council. Sigrid, Halvard, and old Dagmar, who had been alive for nearly a century. I told them what I'd heard. I told them I wanted to refuse the bond. They looked at each other with expressions that ranged from pity to resignation. It was Sigrid who finally spoke, her weathered hand reaching across the table to pat mine. "Child, you've already been marked. The ceremony is in 3 days. To refuse now would be to shame the Alpha in front of the entire pack. It would be grounds for severe punishment. But pack law says the bond must be consensual," I insisted, my voice shaking. "I've studied the old texts. Both parties must willingly. Pack law also says that once you've been marked and accepted the courting period, refusal is an insult to the entire pack," Halvard interrupted, not unkindly. "You should have refused before he marked you, Astrid. Now it's too late." Dagmar said nothing, but her ancient eyes held mine, and in them I saw a deep, weary sadness. She'd seen this before. She knew what was coming. But even she couldn't help me. I left that meeting with my heart in my stomach and my wolf howling in distress. Had 2 choices. Go through with the bonding and lose myself to Bjorn's control, or refuse and face whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. Pack law gave him wide latitude in dealing with disobedience, especially from his intended mate. I spent the next 2 days in a fog. My mother was so happy, bustling around making final preparations, completely oblivious to my inner turmoil. My friends, Solveig and Thyra, threw me a celebration, giggling about the bonding night as if it was something romantic and beautiful. I smiled and nodded and felt like I was drowning. The night before the ceremony, my wolf spoke to me clearly for the first time in my life. Not in feelings or instincts, but in actual words that resonated through my consciousness. "If you let him complete this bond, we will be slaves. I would rather die free than live in chains." She was right. I knew she was right. But the fear was paralyzing. I'd seen what Bjorn did to those who defied him. I'd watched Eric's lashing. I'd heard stories of pack members who challenged his authority and simply disappeared, banished to live as lone wolves, which for our kind is a fate worse than death. We need our pack. We need the connection to others of our kind. Alone we go mad. But maybe madness was better than this. The bonding night arrived with unseasonable warmth. The ceremony was to take place in the ancient stone circle that had served our pack for generations. Torches blazed around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows on the carved runestones. The entire pack was assembled, hundreds of wolves in their human forms, dressed in their finest, waiting to witness the union of their Alpha and his chosen Luna. I wore the white silk gown Hildur had made. My dark hair was braided with silver ribbons. I looked the part of a willing bride. Inside I was screaming. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I suppose. Bjorn stood at the center of the circle, looking magnificent in traditional ceremonial garb, all black leather and silver embroidery. The pack elder, Sigrid, performed the rites, calling on the ancient wolf spirits to bless our union. We exchanged ritual words, drank from the ceremonial cup, allowed our wolves to rise close enough to the surface that our eyes glowed in the torchlight. Then came the moment where I was supposed to bare my neck and willingly accept the completion of the bond, where I was supposed to say the words that would tie my soul to his forever. Bjorn stepped close, his hand cupping the back of my neck, his face descending toward my throat. The pack held its collective breath. This was it, the moment of union. And I said, no. It wasn't loud, barely more than a whisper. But in the hushed silence of the ceremonial circle, it rang out like a thunderclap. Bjorn froze. His hand tightened on my neck, claws pricking my skin. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerously quiet. I forced myself to meet his eyes. My whole body was shaking, but I held my ground. I said no. I don't accept this bond. I can't. The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother let out a sound like a wounded animal. Bjorn's face transformed from surprise to fury in the span of a heartbeat. "You dare!" His voice rose to a roar that echoed off the ancient stones. "You dare to refuse me, to humiliate me in front of my entire pack. Pack law says the bond must be consensual," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm within my rights to refuse." For a moment I thought he might shift right there and tear me apart. His body trembled with barely contained rage, his eyes flickering between human and wolf. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and controlled, which was somehow worse than the anger. "Very well. If you refuse the bond, then you refuse your place as Luna. And a wolf who refuses her alpha must be reminded of her place." He turned to address the pack. "According to pack law, a mate who refuses the bonding ceremony after accepting the mark is guilty of pack betrayal. The punishment is 20 lashes, to be administered immediately." 20 lashes. The same punishment he'd given Eric for a minor transgression. I'd known this might happen, but hearing it declared so formally made my knees weak. Around the circle, I saw varied reactions. Some pack members looked satisfied, nodding at this justice. Others looked uncomfortable, averting their eyes. My mother was weeping openly. Sigrid's ancient face was carved from stone, revealing nothing. "However," Bjorn continued, and something in his tone made me look up, "since this is a particularly egregious betrayal committed during sacred ceremony, I'm invoking Alpha's prerogative. 30 lashes. And she will receive them in the bonding chamber, where she refused to fulfill her duty." 30. Oh moon goddess. People had died from 30 lashes. Two of Bjorn's enforcers, Stan and Vidar, stepped forward to grip my arms. They weren't rough, but they were firm, and they avoided my eyes as they led me away from the ceremonial circle. Behind me, I heard Bjorn dismissing the pack, his voice smooth and controlled, explaining that justice must be served, but afterward there would be celebration, as there always was when order was maintained. The bonding chamber was a stone room deep in the Alpha's house, ancient and sacred. Torches lined the walls. In the center stood the ceremonial bed where we were supposed to have completed the bond. Instead, Stan and Vidar led me to a post embedded in the stone floor, used generations ago for some purpose I'd never thought to question. They bound my wrists to the post, securing me so I stood with my back exposed. Someone, I didn't see who, cut away the back of my beautiful silk gown, leaving my skin bare from shoulders to waist. The night air raised goosebumps along my exposed flesh. Then everyone left except Bjorn. The door closed with a finality that made my stomach drop. This was it. No witnesses except my would-be mate and the moon goddess herself. Bjorn circled me slowly, like a predator stalking prey. I could feel his eyes on my bare back, assessing, calculating. When he finally spoke, his voice was conversational, almost gentle. That scared me more than rage would have. "You could have had everything, Astrid. Power, protection, status. I would have made you the most respected Luna in 3 territories. Our children would have been legendary." He paused in front of me, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Instead, you chose humiliation. For both of us." "I chose freedom," I whispered. His hand moved faster than thought, striking my face hard enough to snap my head to the side. Stars exploded across my vision. "You chose defiance. And defiance must be broken." He moved behind me, and I heard the whisper of leather as he lifted the ceremonial whip from its place on the wall. The pack's punishment whip, designed specifically for this purpose, blessed by elders and used sparingly, only for the most serious transgressions. "Count them," he ordered. "If you lose count, we start over." The first strike came without further warning. The whip kissed my skin like fire, a line of pure agony that stole my breath. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, determined not to give him the satisfaction. "One," I gasped when I could speak. The second strike crossed the first, forming an X of pain across my shoulders. My wolf howled inside me, wanting to break free to fight, but the silver in the ropes binding my wrists prevented my shift. I was trapped in my human form, vulnerable and weak. 2. By the 5th strike I was shaking uncontrollably. By the 10th, tears streamed down my face though I refused to scream. Bjorn worked methodically, spacing the strikes evenly across my back, ensuring maximum coverage and maximum pain. He wasn't doing this in a rage. He was doing it deliberately, calculatedly, each strike placed with precision. 15. My voice was barely audible now. "I can't hear you," Bjorn said, and there was a smile in his voice that made me want to vomit. "Speak up, little wolf, or we start over." 15, I said louder, though it cost me everything. The strikes continued. My entire world narrowed to pain and the desperate need to keep counting. Somewhere around 20, I started to feel disconnected from my body, as if I was floating above the scene, watching some other girl being destroyed by the man who claimed to love her. 25, 26, 27. Each number was a battle. My back was on fire, blood running in rivulets down my skin, soaking into what remained of my ceremonial gown. I could smell copper and sweat and my own fear. 28. My vision was starting to tunnel. 29. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. 30. The final strike was the worst, delivered with all of Bjorn's considerable strength, and this time I couldn't stop the scream that tore from my throat. My legs gave out, and I hung from my bound wrists, consciousness flickering like a dying flame. I heard Bjorn set down the whip. Heard his footsteps as he circled back to face me. Through my swimming vision, I saw him crouch down, grabbing my chin roughly to force my head up. "Have you learned your lesson?" he asked softly. "Are you ready to accept the bond now?" Everything hurt. My back was nothing but pain. Blood loss was making me dizzy and sick. It would be so easy to just say yes. To give in. To let him complete the bond and at least have some relief from this agony. But my wolf, even battered and bleeding, snarled inside me. And I remembered what she'd said. Better to die free than live in chains. Through cracked and bloody lips I whispered, "No." His face transformed. The calculated cruelty gave way to genuine rage. His hand shot out, wrapping around my throat, cutting off my air. "You stupid, stubborn bitch," he snarled. "I'll beat you every night until you submit. I'll break every bone in your body. I'll make you wish you'd never been born." Black spots danced across my vision. My lungs burned. This was it. He was going to kill me right here, and maybe that was better. Maybe death was the only way out. But then something strange happened. The door to the bonding chamber burst open. In the threshold stood my mother, Freja, and behind her, old Dagmar the Elder. Both women's eyes widened in horror as they took in the scene. My bloody back, Bjorn's hand around my throat, my nearly unconscious form hanging from the post. "Release her." Dagmar's voice cracked like a whip, carrying an authority I'd never heard from the ancient wolf before. "Bjorn Eriksson, release her this instant." To my shock, Bjorn did. He dropped me like I was burning him, stepping back with his hands raised. I collapsed to the floor, unable to support my own weight, barely conscious. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard voices arguing above me. Exceeded the bounds of punishment. She refused the bond, it's my right. 30 lashes for a refusal is barbaric. Pack law is clear. Hands, gentle ones, were touching me. My mother's voice, sobbing my name. Cool water on my ruined back, making me gasp with new pain. Someone was untying my wrists. Someone else was wrapping me in soft cloth. Then Dagmar's weathered face was close to mine, her ancient eyes boring into my own. "Child, can you hear me?" I managed a tiny nod. "Listen carefully. I'm invoking Elder's sanctuary. Do you understand? You are under my protection now. Even an alpha cannot override it. Elder's Sanctuary. A law so old most packs had forgotten it existed. It allowed an elder to claim protection over a pack member in extreme circumstances, temporarily removing them from the alpha's authority. It hadn't been invoked in our pack in over 50 years. You can't, Bjorn was snarling. She's my marked mate. She's mine. She refused the bond, Dagmar said, her voice steel. Which means the mark is incomplete. And an incomplete mark can be broken. Pack law allows for it if the refusal is valid. Valid. She humiliated me. You nearly killed her, my mother screamed, her usual deference to authority shattered by maternal rage. Look at her. She could die. She should die, Bjorn spat. Defiant wolves are worthless wolves. Dagmar rose to her full height, which wasn't much, but suddenly she seemed 10 feet tall. You will not touch this girl again. I am calling a council meeting tomorrow at dawn. We will determine if her refusal was valid under ancient pack law. Until then, she is under my protection. For a long moment, I thought Bjorn would refuse. Would invoke his authority as alpha and override even Elder's Sanctuary. But Dagmar was popular in the pack, respected by everyone. And there were witnesses now. My mother, and I could see other faces in the doorway. Solveig and Thyra, their faces pale with shock. Sigrid and Halvard, the other elders, looking grim. Bjorn had miscalculated. He'd meant to break me privately, but now his cruelty was on display. Fine, he said finally, his voice cold. Take her. But if the council rules in my favor, and they will, she's mine again. And next time I won't stop at 30. They carried me out of that chamber, out of that house, to Dagmar's dwelling on the edge of pack territory. I drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey, aware only of pain and my mother's tears and Dagmar's steady ancient presence. In Dagmar's house, they laid me on a soft bed on my stomach. Someone with a healer's touch, I later learned it was Solveig's mother Runa, cleaned my wounds with herbs that stung but helped. She bandaged my back with careful hands, murmuring prayers to the moon goddess as she worked. I floated in a haze of pain and fever for what might have been hours or days. Voices came and went. My mother's constant presence, holding my hand, singing old lullabies from my childhood. Dagmar's weathered voice, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Once I heard arguing, Bjorn's rage muffled by distance and walls, demanding his property be returned. When I finally surfaced to full consciousness, sunlight was streaming through a window. My back was a constant throb of pain, but manageable now. I was alive. Against all odds I was alive. Dagmar sat in a chair beside my bed, looking like she hadn't slept. When she saw my eyes open, she leaned forward. Welcome back, child. The council. My voice was rough, my throat damaged from Bjorn's choking grip. Meets in an hour. Can you walk? I tested my limbs carefully. Everything hurt but nothing seemed broken. I think so. Good. 'Cause you need to be there. You need to tell them everything. The council meeting was held in the Great Hall, a massive room that served as the pack's gathering place. Every senior member of the pack was there. The elders, Dagmar, Sigrid and Halvard, sat at a raised table. Below them, arranged in a semicircle, sat the pack's ranking members. Warriors like Sten and Vidar, the heads of pack families. And Bjorn, sitting apart from everyone else. His face a mask of controlled fury. I walked into that room leaning on my mother's arm, every step an agony. When the assembled pack saw my face, my split lip, the bruises on my throat, the way I moved like every breath hurt, there were gasps and murmurs. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable, as if witnessing my suffering made them complicit. Sigrid called the meeting to order with 3 sharp strikes of her staff on the stone floor. We are here to determine if Astrid Torstendotter's refusal of the Alpha bond was valid under pack law. If valid, the incomplete mark will be broken and both parties released from obligation. If invalid, she will be returned to Alpha Bjorn for bonding and her punishment will be considered complete. My fate decided by committee, I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but it hurt too much. Alpha Bjorn, present your case, Sigrid said. Bjorn stood, and even battered and afraid, I couldn't deny his commanding presence. He looked every inch the alpha as he addressed the council. Elders, honored pack members, the law is clear. Astrid accepted my mark 3 months ago. She participated willingly in the courting period. She made no objection until the moment of bonding. This was calculated defiance, intended to humiliate me before the pack. Such behavior cannot be tolerated. He paused, letting his words sink in. I admit my punishment was severe. But surely you understand that a pack requires strong leadership. An alpha who can be defied without consequence is no alpha at all. The stability of our entire pack depends on maintaining proper hierarchy. Several pack members nodded. He was making sense, at least on the surface. Pack law was built on hierarchy and obedience. Without it, we descended into chaos. Moreover, Bjorn continued, I chose Astrid specifically because I saw potential in her. Strong bloodlines, despite her father's unfortunate death. With proper guidance, with the bond fully formed, she would have made an excellent Luna. I still believe that. If the council returns her to me, I promise to be patient, to guide her to understanding. Last night was regrettable, but necessary. He sat down looking satisfied. He'd played it perfectly. The strong but merciful alpha, willing to forgive and move forward. Astrid Torstendaughter, Sigrid said, present your case. I stood, suppressing a wince as the movement pulled at my bandaged back. For a moment I couldn't speak. What was I supposed to say? That I'd overheard a private conversation. That I was afraid. Fear wasn't grounds for refusing a bond. Then I remembered what Dagmar had said as she helped me dress this morning. Tell them the truth. All of it. Trust in the old laws, child. They were made to protect wolves like you. So I did. I told them everything. About overhearing Bjorn's conversation with Leif. About learning that he wanted the bond specifically so he could control me. So I would have no choice but to obey his every command. I told them about Eric's excessive punishment. About Bjorn's hand on my throat in our first argument, about the fear that had been growing in me for weeks. Pack law says the bond must be consensual, I said, my voice gaining strength. Not just in the moment of bonding, but truly consensual. A bond formed under duress, under threat, under fear of what will happen if you refuse. That's not a real bond. That's slavery. And our ancestors, the first wolves, they fled human lands because they refused to be enslaved. How can we claim to honor them while forcing bonds that are bonds in name only? The room was silent. I pressed on, knowing this might be my only chance. I'm not saying Alpha Bjorn is a bad leader. Maybe he's right that the pack needs strong hierarchy. But a Luna isn't property. She's supposed to be a partner, an equal voice, someone who can counsel and sometimes challenge her mate for the good of the pack. If the bond makes that impossible, if it removes my ability to ever say no, to ever disagree, then it's not a mate bond. It's ownership. I turned to address Bjorn directly. You said you chose me because you saw potential in me. But the moment I showed any independence, any spine, you decided that needed to be broken. You don't want a mate, Alpha. You want a slave who looks like a mate. Bjorn's face was dark with rage, but he couldn't speak out of turn in council. He had to sit there and take it. I turned back to the elders. I invoke the right of refusal by cause. Ancient pack law allows a chosen mate to refuse the bond if they can prove the alpha's intent is corrupt or harmful. I believe I've proven that. Refusal by cause. Another old law that was rarely used. I'd spent my feverish hours in Dagmar's bed digging through every scrap of pack law I could remember, looking for any way out. This was it. My only chance. The elders conferred in whispers. The rest of the pack waited in tense silence. My legs were shaking, but I remained standing. To sit would be to show weakness, and I'd shown enough of that already. Finally, Sigrid struck her staff again. The council will now vote. All in favor of ruling Astrid's refusal valid under the provision of refusal by cause. Dagmar's hand shot up immediately. After a pause, Halvard raised his. But Sigrid hesitated, and my heart sank. We needed all 3 elders to vote yes for it to be official. Sigrid, Dagmar said softly, you saw what he did to her. Look at her face. Her throat. That wasn't discipline. That was cruelty. Discipline is often cruel, Sigrid replied, but she sounded uncertain. Discipline teaches, Dagmar countered. What Bjorn did was meant to break her. And you know as well as I do what he planned once the bond was complete. We've all seen alphas abuse the bond before. We've all watched wolves lose themselves because their mates used the bond to override their will. Is that what we want for Astrid? For any of our daughters? The room was silent. Sigrid looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in her ancient eyes. Maybe she was remembering her own daughter, who died young in circumstances that were never quite explained. Maybe she was just tired of watching strong wolves be broken. Her hand rose slowly. Valid, she said softly. Relief nearly knocked me over. 3 votes. It was official. However, Sigrid continued, and my relief turned to dread. Refusal by cause requires compensation. Alpha Bjorn was publicly humiliated. The pack's future was disrupted. This cannot go unmarked. The 30 lashes, my mother started, were for refusal of bond, Sigrid interrupted. This is compensation for the Alpha's loss. Astrid, you will be stripped of your rank. You will move to the Omega quarters and serve the pack in manual labor for 1 full year. At the end of that year, you may petition to be returned to your previous status. Additionally, you are forbidden from taking any other mate for 3 years, to ensure you're not simply avoiding Bjorn in favor of another. It was harsh. Omegas were the lowest-ranking pack members, doing the hardest and dirtiest jobs. And 3 years was a long time to wait when wolves only lived about twice as long as humans. But it wasn't death. It wasn't being bound to Bjorn. I accept, I said quickly before anyone could reconsider. Sigrid struck her staff 1 final time. So it is decided. The incomplete mark will be broken by ritual at moonset tonight. Until then, Astrid remains under Elder Sanctuary. This council is concluded. The room erupted into whispers and movement. Through it all, Bjorn sat frozen, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not really. He might not be able to force the bond anymore, but an alpha had many ways to make a pack member's life miserable. But I was alive. I was free. And that was enough. For now. The mark-breaking ritual was simpler than I'd expected. At moonset, as the last sliver of moon disappeared below the horizon, Dagmar drew runes on my shoulder where Bjorn had marked me. She chanted words in the old language, the original tongue of our ancestors. I felt heat, then a sharp burning, and when I looked down, the mark was gone. Just smooth, unmarked skin. The bond, which had been incomplete and barely felt, severed with a snap that made me gasp. For the first time in 3 months, my mind was entirely my own. No whisper of Bjorn's emotions at the edge of my consciousness. No pull toward him that I'd been fighting constantly. Just me and my wolf, alone and free. I cried then, great heaving sobs of relief and grief and exhaustion. Dagmar held me like I was her own daughter, letting me break in the safety of her arms. My mother was there too, and my friends, all of them surrounding me with pack warmth and acceptance. The next year was the hardest of my life. As an Omega, I did everything no one else wanted to do. I cleaned the pack's communal spaces. I prepared food in the kitchens. I hauled firewood and dug latrines and scrubbed floors until my hands bled. The other Omegas, wolves who'd been born into low rank or had committed crimes, treated me with suspicion at first. I was the girl who'd refused an alpha, after all. I'd disrupted the natural order. But slowly, as they saw me work without complaint, as they saw me take the hardest jobs and never try to use my former status to get special treatment, they accepted me. I learned their names. Astrid the mighty almost Luna became Astrid the Omega who could fix anything, who worked harder than anyone, who never complained. Bjorn made things difficult when he could. He assigned me the worst jobs. He found excuses to criticize my work. But he couldn't openly abuse me without justification, not after the council's ruling. And Dagmar watched him like a hawk, ready to invoke Elder's sanctuary again if he crossed the line. I also learned things in the Omega quarters that I'd never known as a mid-ranking pack member. I learned about the wolves who struggled, who lived paycheck to paycheck, who went hungry so their children could eat. I learned about the pack members who'd been forgotten or overlooked, whose talents were wasted because they'd been born into the wrong families. I learned that strength had nothing to do with rank, and that some of the bravest, most resilient wolves in our pack were the ones doing the jobs no one else wanted. 6 months into my service, something unexpected happened. There was a challenge to Bjorn's authority. Not from me. I was forbidden from such things by the terms of my compensation. But from a wolf named Lars, a warrior who'd been growing increasingly dissatisfied with Bjorn's brutal leadership style. Lars was strong, though not as strong as Bjorn. The challenge was bloody and brief. Bjorn won, as everyone expected. But in winning, he revealed something. His wolf was unstable, unbalanced. The incomplete bond had damaged him more than he'd let on. Without a mate to ground him, to help him manage the immense pressure of being alpha, he was slowly losing control. The pack saw it. The elders saw it. And Bjorn knew they saw it. 2 weeks later, he took a new mate. A quiet girl named Joran from a lesser family. Someone who would never dare refuse him. The bonding ceremony was rushed and private. When it was done, Bjorn seemed more stable, but there was a haunted look in Joran's eyes that made my stomach turn. She'd saved his sanity by sacrificing her own freedom. I wanted to help her, but there was nothing I could do. She'd accepted the bond willingly, even if that willingness came from desperation rather than desire. All I could do was watch from a distance and remember why I'd said no. As my year of service drew to a close, I noticed changes in myself. The fear that had dominated me for so long had transformed into something harder, sharper. I'd learned to trust my instincts. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. And I'd learned that pack law, for all its flaws, still held protections for those brave enough to invoke them. But I'd also learned that the system was broken. That wolves like Bjorn could twist pack law to serve their own ends. That too many of our people suffered in silence because they believed they had no choice. That the old ways, the ways of true partnership and mutual respect, had been corrupted over generations into something ugly. On the last day of my service, Dagmar called me to her dwelling. I arrived to find not just her, but Sigrid and Halvard as well. All 3 elders together, which was unusual enough to make my wolf prick her ears in attention. "Sit, child," Dagmar said, gesturing to a chair. "We have something to discuss with you." I sat, nervous but curious. My year was up. Tomorrow I would petition to be restored to my previous rank, to return to normal pack life. I'd expected that to be a formality. Sigrid spoke first. "Astrid, we've been watching you this year. The way you've conducted yourself. The way you've helped the other Omegas, taught them skills, organized them into more efficient workgroups. You've shown leadership. Natural leadership," Halvard added. "The kind that comes not from dominance, but from respect." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Dagmar leaned forward, her ancient eyes intense. "The pack is changing, Astrid. Wolves are unhappy. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough that we elders have noticed. They see Bjorn's brutality. They see Joran's eyes. They remember what happened to you, and they wonder if it could happen to their daughters, their sisters." "What are you saying?" I asked carefully. "We're saying that change is coming whether we will it or not," Sigrid said. "And when it comes, the pack will need wolves who understand both the old ways and the new realities. Wolves who've seen the system from every angle. Wolves who've suffered under injustice but haven't let it make them cruel. We want you to train as an elder," Dagmar said bluntly. "It will take years, decades even. But you have the temperament for it and the understanding. And when the time comes, you'll help guide this pack into whatever future awaits it." I stared at them, shocked. Elders were chosen from the oldest and wisest wolves. I was barely into my third decade. "I'm too young," I managed. "You'll grow older," Halvard said with a slight smile. "We all do. The question is whether you'll grow wiser as well." "Why me?" "Yes. There are others more qualified, more educated." "Because you said no," Dagmar said simply. "When it would have been easier to say yes. When saying no nearly killed you. That's the kind of courage we need. Not the courage of warriors on a battlefield, but the courage of standing alone against power when everyone tells you to submit." Thought about it. Thought about the life I'd imagined before Bjorn marked me. Simple and quiet and safe. Thought about the life I'd lived this past year. Hard and humbling but somehow honest. Thought about Joran's haunted eyes and Eric's bloody back and all the wolves who suffered because no one was brave enough to say the system was broken. "Yes," I said. "I'll train. I'll learn. And I'll help change things." The three elders smiled, and in their smiles I saw hope. Real hope for the first time in a long time. The training was grueling. I studied the old texts, learning laws that hadn't been invoked in generations. I learned meditation techniques that allowed me to strengthen my connection to my wolf. I learned healing arts and conflict resolution and the subtle politics of pack management. And through it all, I continued working, first as a mid-ranking member again, then gradually taking on more responsibility. Years passed, 5 then 10. I watched Bjorn's reign continue, watched him and Joran produce 3 children, strong wolves who might someday lead the pack. I watched Eric grow into a fine young warrior despite his early trauma. I watched my friends Solveig and Thyra find mates and start families. I watched my mother grow gray at the temples and slower in her movements. And I watched the undercurrent of discontent in the pack grow stronger. Started small. Wolves questioning orders a bit more frequently. Omegas organizing for better treatment. Families refusing to let their daughters be courted by wolves with reputations for cruelty. Nothing dramatic, but a slow shift in the culture like tectonic plates moving underground. Bjorn felt it too. He became more paranoid, more controlling. He established new rules, new punishments. He surrounded himself with loyal wolves who would enforce his will without question. But the harder he squeezed, the more wolves slipped through his fingers. Then, in my 12th year since the refused bonding, something happened that changed everything. A neighboring pack, the Ravenswood, suffered a catastrophic failure of leadership. Their alpha had bonded with a mate through coercion, and she'd eventually snapped, killing him in his sleep before taking her own life. The pack descended into chaos, with 3 different wolves claiming the right to lead. The fighting lasted for months and left dozens dead. The story spread through the territories like wildfire. Other packs started examining their own practices. Some doubled down on traditional hierarchy, claiming the Ravenswood's failure was due to insufficient discipline. But others, like ours, started asking uncomfortable questions. Dagmar called a pack meeting, the first general assembly in years. Every adult wolf was required to attend. In the great hall, packed shoulder to shoulder, we gathered to discuss the Ravenswood situation and what lessons we should draw from it. Bjorn stood at the front, flanked by his enforcers. "What happened to Ravenswood is a tragedy," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But it's also a warning. A warning about what happens when natural hierarchy is disrupted. When wolves, especially females, are allowed to question their alpha's authority. Strength and order prevent chaos. I've maintained both in this pack for over a decade." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. He wasn't wrong exactly. Our pack was stable. We had food, shelter, protection. Compared to Ravenswood, we were thriving. But then Dagmar stood, and the room fell silent. Alpha Bjorn speaks of strength and order. But I would speak of something else. Of consent and partnership. The Ravenswood Alpha forced a bond, and it destroyed his pack. How many of our own bonds are formed from genuine choice? And how many from pressure, expectation, or fear? The silence that followed was deafening. No one had dared question bonding practices so openly before. Bjorn's face darkened. Elder Dagmar, are you suggesting we abandon traditions that have served wolf kind for millennia? I'm suggesting we examine whether our traditions still serve us, Dagmar replied calmly. Or whether we serve them. Astrid, stand please. My heart pounded as I rose. Every eye in the hall turned to me. I knew what Dagmar was doing. She was using me as an example, showing what happened when a wolf was brave enough to refuse. 12 years ago, this wolf refused an alpha bond, Dagmar said. She was brutally punished for it. And yet, look at her now. She serves as my apprentice. She's helped reform our omega treatment, our dispute resolution, our education system for young wolves. She's been more valuable to this pack as a free wolf than she ever would have been as a coerced Luna. She disrupted pack stability, Bjorn countered. She caused chaos and division. Did she? Dagmar looked around the room. Or did she expose chaos and division that already existed? How many of you, be honest, have felt pressured into bonds or relationships you weren't sure about? How many have watched your children suffer under mates who abuse the bond? How many have stayed silent because you feared punishment? Slowly, tentatively, hands began to rise. A few at first, then more. Not a majority, but enough to make Bjorn's face go white with fury. Among them was Jorun, his own mate, her hand raised with tears streaming down her face. The room erupted into chaos. Wolves shouting, arguing, some defending tradition, others demanding change. Bjorn roared for silence, his alpha command rolling through the room, forcing most wolves to quiet. But not all. Some, the strongest-willed, continued speaking. The command was losing its power. Enough! Sigrid's staff cracked against the floor 3 times. We will have order. This discussion will continue, but calmly and rationally. We will form a committee to examine our bonding practices and recommend reforms. It will include representatives from all ranks. Alpha Bjorn, Elder Dagmar, and Astrid will all serve on it. We meet in 1 month with preliminary findings. It was a compromise, kicking the can down the road, but it was also progress. For the first time, our pack was officially acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, the old ways needed updating. The next month was intense. The committee met daily, arguing over every detail of pack law and tradition. Bjorn fought every proposed change tooth and nail. But he was outnumbered. Not just by me and Dagmar, but by other wolves who'd been quietly suffering, who saw this as their chance to be heard. We proposed reforms. Mandatory cooling-off periods between marking and bonding. Third-party counselors to ensure both parties truly consented. Clearer definitions of what constituted abuse of the mate bond. Easier processes for dissolving bonds that had become toxic. And most controversially, limits on alpha authority, ensuring that no one wolf, not even the alpha, could override basic rights. When we presented our recommendations to the full pack, the vote was close. 47% in favor, 38% against, 15% abstaining. Not overwhelming support, but enough to pass. Our pack was changing slowly and painfully, but changing nonetheless. Bjorn was livid. He saw the reforms as a personal attack, an erosion of his authority. And in a way they were. But they were also necessary. That became clear 6 months later when another pack, inspired by our reforms, implemented similar changes. Then another. A wave was building, a fundamental reassessment of how wolf packs should function. Not every pack embraced it. Some territories doubled down on traditional hierarchy, claiming we were weakening ourselves. There were heated debates at inter-pack gatherings. Some packs severed alliances with us, calling us too progressive, too human in our thinking. But others reached out wanting to learn from our experience. Through it all I continued my training. Dagmar was growing older, slower. Her memory sometimes faltered. She knew her time was limited, and she poured everything she knew into me, desperate to ensure her knowledge wouldn't die with her. On a cold winter morning in my 15th year since the refused bonding, Dagmar called me to her dwelling. I found her in bed, her breathing labored. I knew immediately that this was goodbye. Astrid, she whispered, her ancient hand grasping mine with surprising strength. You've learned well. Better than I hoped. When I'm gone, you'll take my place on the Elder Council. You'll recover, I said, but we both knew it was a lie. Wolves lived long but not forever. Dagmar had seen nearly a century. Her time had come. Listen to me, she said urgently. The changes we've started, they're good. But they're fragile. There will be wolves who want to undo everything. Who say the old ways were better. You must hold firm. Not with cruelty, never with cruelty. But with conviction. Remember why you said no. Remember what it cost you. And use that memory to protect others. I will, I promised, tears streaming down my face. I swear it. She smiled then, peaceful and content. Good. That's good. I can rest now, knowing the pack is in capable hands. Your father would be proud, child. So proud. She closed her eyes and slipped away quietly, a life well lived coming to its natural end. The pack mourned her for 3 days, as was traditional for elders. We sang the old songs, told stories of her wisdom, burned offerings to guide her spirit to the moon goddess. And when it was done, I took my place on the Elder Council, the youngest wolf to ever hold the position. My first act as elder was to propose something radical. A formal apology to every wolf who'd suffered under unjust punishment in the past 20 years. A recognition that our system had harmed our own people. And a commitment to do better. It was symbolic more than practical, but symbols matter. They set tone and intention. Eric, the young wolf who'd been lashed for accidentally crossing Bjorn's path, was the first to receive an apology. He stood in the great hall, now a grown warrior with scars he shouldn't have, and listened as I, representing the Elder Council, acknowledged the injustice done to him. He cried. So did his mother, Ingrid. So did I. We apologized to 17 wolves in total. Some accepted graciously. Others rejected it, saying words couldn't undo trauma. They were right, of course. But it was a start. Bjorn watched all of this with barely concealed contempt. His power was waning and he knew it. The reforms had made it harder for him to rule through fear. His own mate, Joran, had started attending the support groups we'd established for wolves in difficult bonds. His eldest son, Gunnar, named for his grandfather, had openly sided with the reformers. Everything Bjorn had built his authority on was crumbling. And cornered wolves are dangerous. The attack came on a spring evening, as I walked alone from a council meeting. I'd stayed late, reviewing documents, and the sun had set while I worked. I should have been more careful, but I'd grown complacent. It had been years since anyone had threatened me directly. Bjorn emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. His wolf was in his eyes, barely controlled, and I realized immediately that he'd snapped. The pressure had finally broken him. "This is your fault," he snarled, backing me against a wall. "Everything. The reforms, the questioning, the loss of respect. You poisoned this pack against me. You, a worthless Omega who should have been grateful I chose you." My hand went to the whistle I now carried, a simple device that would summon help. But Bjorn was faster. He struck my hand, sending the whistle flying into darkness. Then his hand was on my throat, just like it had been 15 years ago in the bonding chamber. "I should have killed you that night," he growled. "Should have kept going until you stopped breathing. No one would have questioned it. An alpha's right to discipline his mate." "I'm not your mate," I gasped out. "Never was. Never will be." His grip tightened. Black spots danced across my vision. This was it. After everything, after surviving and changing and growing, I was going to die in a shadowy alley at the hands of a broken alpha. But then I felt something. My wolf, rising up stronger than she'd ever been. Years of training, of meditation, of learning to merge more fully with my animal spirit. She poured power into me, and I felt my eyes glow, my claws extend. I struck fast, raking my claws across Bjorn's face. He howled and stumbled back, and I didn't wait. I ran fast as I could, toward the center of pack territory where there would be people. Lights. 50. Behind me, Bjorn gave chase. He was stronger, but I was desperate, and I knew these paths better than anyone. I'd walked them as an omega, carrying loads and running errands. I knew every shortcut, every hiding place. I burst into the great hall where a group of wolves were gathered for evening meal. They looked up in shock as I stumbled in, bloody and gasping, with Bjorn right behind me, his face a mask of madness and rage. "He tried to kill me," I gasped. "The Alpha tried to kill an elder." The room froze. For a long moment no one moved. Then Gunnar, Bjorn's own son, stepped forward to stand between me and his father. "Father, stop," Gunnar said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "This has to end." "Move, boy," Bjorn snarled. "No." Gunnar stood firm. And behind him, other wolves moved to form a barrier. Eric the warrior, Solveig and Thyra, my old friends. Even some of Bjorn's own enforcers, Stan and Vidar, looked uncertain, unwilling to follow their alpha into this madness. "You would all betray me." Bjorn looked around the room, seeing wolves he'd led for years now standing against him. "I am your alpha." "You were our alpha," Sigrid's voice rang out. The ancient elder had appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on her staff. "But an alpha who attacks an elder has violated the most sacred laws of pack. You are alpha no more." Should have taken a trial, formal hearing, a vote. But sometimes change happens in a moment. In a single instant where the old order collapses and a new one rises from the ruins. Bjorn looked around at faces that were closed to him. At his own son standing with the wolves who opposed him. At his mate Joran, tears streaming down her face, who didn't move to his defense. And he understood that it was over. With a howl of rage and grief, he shifted into wolf form and ran. Just ran out of the hall, out of pack lands, into the forest beyond. We heard him howling in the distance, a lone wolf's song of loss and fury. He never came back. The pack law was clear. An alpha who abandoned his pack forfeited all rights and titles. Gunnar, as the eldest child, should have inherited leadership. But Gunnar shocked everyone by refusing. "I've watched what absolute power did to my father," he said in the emergency council meeting we held the next day. "I don't want that. I propose we change our structure entirely. Shared leadership. An alpha for external affairs and defense, but a council for internal governance. Checks and balances like the old human governments." It was radical, unprecedented. And after a night of intense debate, we agreed to try it. Gunnar became alpha for external matters, but all major decisions would go through an expanded elder council. I was appointed to oversee internal affairs, a new position we created specifically to prevent any one wolf from holding too much power. Some packs called us crazy, said we were too weak to survive. But we did survive. We thrived. Wolves who'd felt stifled under Bjorn's rule flourished. Our young people grew up learning to think critically, to question respectfully, to lead through service rather than domination. It wasn't perfect. We made mistakes. There were wolves who never adapted, who left for more traditional packs. There were growing pains and arguments and setbacks. But slowly, year by year, we built something new. Other packs watched us. Some implemented similar reforms. A movement spread through the territories, a quiet revolution of wolves choosing partnership over domination, consent over coercion, balance over tyranny. 20 years after I said no in that ceremonial circle, I stood in a new circle of a different kind. We were welcoming a young couple into their bond, a warrior named Sven and a healer named Freya. They stood together, hands joined, eyes locked on each other with such love and trust that it made my chest ache. "Do you, Sven, accept this bond freely and without coercion?" I asked, using the new ceremonial words we'd written. "I do," he said firmly. "Do you, Freya, accept this bond freely and without coercion?" "I do," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "Then by the power vested in me as elder, I recognize this bond. May it bring you strength, joy, and partnership in all things." They kissed as the pack erupted in celebration. It was a good bond, a true bond, formed not from pressure or expectation but from genuine choice. This was what we'd fought for. This was why I'd said no all those years ago. After the ceremony, as I watched the celebration from the edge of the crowd, a young wolf approached me. She couldn't have been more than 20, her eyes full of questions and hope. "Elder Astrid," she said shyly, "I heard the stories about you, about how you refused an alpha bond. I wondered. I'm being courted by someone from another pack, and everyone says it's a great match, but I don't feel right about it. And I'm scared to say no. Scared of what people will think." I looked at this young wolf, so like I'd been once, and I took her hands in mine. "Listen to me. Your wolf knows things your human mind doesn't. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Saying no is scary. Might cost you things. But saying yes when every instinct screams no, that costs you more. It costs you yourself." Tears welled in her eyes. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just afraid?" "Then you work through the fear. Talk to the elders, to counselors, to people you trust. Figure out if it's fear that can be overcome or fear that's trying to protect you. But never, ever let anyone tell you that your feelings don't matter. You are not property. You are not a trophy. You are a wolf with inherent worth and dignity. And no bond is more important than your freedom to choose." She hugged me then, this young wolf I barely knew, holding on tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave first." That's when I understood. My story wasn't just about me. It was about every wolf who would come after, who would benefit from the changes we'd made, who would grow up knowing they had choices. The scars on my back had faded over the years, but their lesson remained. Some prices are worth paying. Some battles are worth fighting. And sometimes saying no is the bravest thing you can do. I never did take another mate. For 3 years I was forbidden, and after that I chose not to. Not because I was bitter or broken, but because I'd found something more fulfilling. Purpose, community, the satisfaction of helping wolves build better lives. I had my friends, my mother until she passed peacefully in her sleep at 73, my pack. I had my work. It was enough. It was more than enough. Bjorn died alone in the wilderness 5 years after he fled. A hunter found his body, a lone wolf who'd been brought down by a pack of regular wolves, the non-shifting kind. There's a bitter irony in that. He spent so much of his life trying to dominate others, and in the end, he died alone and forgotten. We marked his passing with a simple ceremony, acknowledging his leadership while not pretending he'd been something he wasn't. Bjorn found happiness after his death. The bond had weakened as Bjorn descended into madness, and with him gone, she was finally free. She never bonded again either, saying once was enough for any lifetime. We became friends, 2 wolves who understood the cost of refusing power, even if our paths to that understanding were different. As I grew older and grayer, as my joints began to ache and my wolf slowed down, I watched the pack continue to evolve. New traditions formed. Old wounds healed. The young wolves who'd grown up under our reforms took leadership positions and continued pushing for progress. We weren't perfect, but we were better. So much better than we'd been. On my 70th birthday, the pack threw a celebration. Wolves came from other territories, packs who'd implemented similar reforms, all wanting to honor the wolf who'd said no and lived to tell about it. There were speeches and gifts and stories. So many stories of wolves who'd been inspired by my choice to make their own brave choices. Gunnar, now fully gray himself, presented me with a carved wooden wolf. "For the elder who taught us that true strength isn't about domination," he said. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." I held that carving and looked out at the sea of faces. Young and old, high-ranking and low, all of them part of a pack that had learned to value consent over coercion, partnership over domination, freedom over control. This was my legacy. Not children of my body, but children of my spirit, wolves who'd learned from my pain and my triumph. "I didn't do this alone," I said, my voice carrying through the hushed crowd. "Every one of you who questioned, who pushed back, who stood up when it was hard, you're the real heroes of this story. Change doesn't happen because one wolf says no. It happens because many wolves say, enough. Because communities decide they want better for themselves and their children. I just went first. You did the rest. The celebration lasted long into the night. As the moon rose full and bright, we sang the old songs and told the old stories, but we also sang new songs and told new stories. Stories about the pack we were building, the future we were creating. I slipped away before dawn, my old bones needing rest. As I walked back to my dwelling under the fading stars, I thought about that girl I'd been 20 years ago, terrified and bloody, hanging from a post in a stone chamber. I wished I could go back and tell her it would be okay, that the pain would fade, that she'd survive and thrive and help change the world. But maybe she already knew. Maybe that's why she said no. Because some part of her, some deep instinct, understood that her story was never just about her. It was about possibility. About proving that refusal was possible, that survival after refusal was possible, that a whole new way of being was possible. My wolf stirred inside me, old now but still fierce. Still mine, completely and utterly mine. Never anyone else's to command or control. That feeling alone made everything worth it. As I settled into bed and let sleep claim me, my last thought was one of gratitude. For the elders who'd protected me. For the friends who'd stood by me. For the pack that had learned and grown. And for myself, for having the courage to say that single life-changing word. Well, sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. One word. One moment of courage. One wolf standing alone against the darkness, saying this far and no further. I said no and the world shifted. And I would do it again 1,000 times over, even knowing the cost. 'Cause I survived. Thrive. And I helped build a world where no wolf would have to make the choice I made, where no one would be beaten for asserting their basic rights, where bonds would be formed from love instead of compulsion. That's worth any price, any scar, any pain. That's the story I leave behind, carved not just in wood but in the very bones of our pack structure. The story of the wolf who said no and lived to watch everything change. And change it did. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what moment hit you hardest. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need the message. And remember, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to say no when something doesn't feel right. Your voice matters. Your choices matter. You matter.